Good evening. Hope you had a nice weekend so far and are ready to learn a bit more and also, of course, find out a bit more on some more IVF cases. As you know, we are back with more cases and we have another special guest. As you can see, Dr. Vladimiro Silva is with us once again. You've been with us before and I'm very, very happy and excited to have you. Dr. Vladimiro, how are you feeling? Great to have you, as I've mentioned.
Hi, Caroline. It's always a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. It's quite, I love to participate in your webinars, and so I'm really looking forward for this one as well.
Definitely, we are always happy to have you as our speaker. Of course, today the plan was a bit different, and Dr. Vladimiro will tell you about it. But of course, I'm glad that we are able to be here and remember that we are here for you. We are here to simply answer some of your questions. Of course, Dr. Silva will do that. And as you know, we will start with our presentation on low AMH levels, and Dr. Vladimiro will talk about two cases. But before that, he will also talk about low AMH, what can be done, and etc. And at the end, remember, there will be time for your questions. If you have them ready, you can go ahead, type those in. If not, you can do it later on, of course. And remember that My IVF Answers is a part of European Fertility Society. And since mid of September, we already are talking only about success stories. And you probably saw some of our previous webinars. So there were plenty of success stories already. But I think that anyone looking at those stories can find it inspiring, can find it also useful, and see if maybe this is something that you could try, or maybe you can simply use it, right? So thank you so much for being here with us tonight. And Dr. Vladimiro, let's start sharing your screen and let's start with our presentation, okay?
Okay,
Excellent.
perfect.
Thank you so
you,
much.
Caroline. You're already seeing my screen, right?
Yes, I can see that.
Okay.
And presentation is
So,
here.
Here we are.
All done. Perfect.
Okay, so first of all, I like to start by excusing myself for being here because this was supposed to be Dr. Paula Ruivo Manso's webinar. She had, unfortunately, a personal emergency, nothing very serious, but she couldn't make it. So I'm sorry, but you have me instead of Dr. Paula. I'll try to do my best, and so we will start our presentation. We are talking about patients facing IVF treatment with low AMH. And we will be focusing on success stories. It is very important. I think it's a very nice initiative from My IVF Answers to focus on success stories, because IVF is also about hope. And so we need to know that this can actually work, because if nobody that starts IVF has a history of success. I mean, if people were successful trying to get pregnant, they wouldn't be here. Maybe they wouldn't be listening to this webinar. They wouldn't be going to clinics, Googling about the fertility and their treatments, and specifically about their conditions. So I think it's important, it's inspiring, it's also important for the morale to know cases that actually work, and especially to understand how they can work. And this is a little bit on what I will try to explain in this presentation. So first of all, let's focus on AMH. What is that? Why are we talking about the anti-Mullerian hormone? Well, let's go a little bit backwards and talk about the ovarian reserve. What is this? Well, all women at birth are born with around 2 million eggs. They are not mature eggs. They are primordial follicles, okay? They peak in number during fetal life, and then they undergo atresia thereafter and do not regenerate. What does it mean? It means that the maximum number of eggs is something that the ovaries get to the maximum number of eggs at birth, and then it goes only down from there. At puberty, when women start to ovulate, to producing, to release an egg every month, they only have 400,000 eggs. That's still a lot, actually. But by the age of 30, they have 100,000 eggs, and on menopause, they have obviously no eggs. We know that fertility declines with age. However, it is difficult to predict the pace of reproductive decline in an individual woman. Okay, when we talk about the ovarian reserve, we are talking about the reproductive potential as a function of the number and the quality of remaining oocytes, of the remaining eggs that are still inside the woman's ovaries. This is the definition from the American Society of Reproductive Medicine. And so when we say that a woman has a decreased or diminished ovarian reserve, we are comparing her with women of the same age, having regular menses. And so when we say that a woman has a diminished or a low ovarian reserve, it means that her ovaries are working worse than the average women of her age. Okay, so it is not the same to say that someone has a low ovarian reserve or a diminished ovarian reserve or a decreased ovarian reserve, and to say that that person is on menopause. It is different. Menopause or premature ovarian failure or primary ovarian insufficiency are about the moment where the ovaries stop working. Low ovarian reserve, it means that we have low numbers and probably also low quality of eggs. So, but how can we measure it? Well, essentially, there are two ways to measure the ovarian reserve. One in the blood, and the other one by doing an ultrasound scan. When we are testing blood, there are two parameters that are more important: FSH and AMH, the title of this presentation. Inhibin B is falling relatively. Um, uh, we're not measuring it anymore as we were 10 or 15 years ago. Regarding the ultrasound scan, we measure the number of antral follicles. What is that? Those are the follicles that I was talking about previously. When women start puberty with 400,000 follicles, those follicles will start to develop. It takes about 1,300 days, 300. It takes about 300 days for a follicle to come from the primordial stage to the antral follicle stage, and it is when the follicles are at the antral follicle stage that can be recruited and participate in the ovulation process. So, bottom line, and not to make this too technical, it is important to control for these blood parameters and also to do the ultrasound scan so we can know how many follicles are there available to participate in the ovulation process. And then we can start with the first of these parameters, the FSH. The FSH is a very important hormone. You can see here on the right-hand graphic that it declines with age. You see that for all age groups, the FSH tries to decline. The number of women with normal FSH declines for every age group, and obviously the more elevated the FSH is, the lower is the delivery rate. It is only worse when we are approaching menopause. On the left-hand side, we can see maybe things in a different way. We see age progressing on the right part of the graphic, and here the live birth probability. And here you can see that with the low value of FSH, the pregnancy rate is higher. With higher numbers of FSH, the pregnancy rate is lower, and most importantly, there is the effect of age. So, for example, an older woman with a low FSH has a worse probability of pregnancy than a younger woman with a high FSH. So, age is more important than FSH, but these parameters are both very important. How does it work? There is a part of your brain, of the women's brain, that is called the pituitary gland or the hypophysis that releases the FSH. The FSH stimulates the ovaries to mature the follicles with which all women are born, and then those follicles develop into ovulatory follicles. While growing inside the ovary, they release estradiol, estrogens, and then the level of estrogens is detected by the brain, and it lowers the amount of FSH that is produced. So when a woman has a very high level of FSH, it just means that her brain is not detecting a response from the ovaries, so it produces more and more and more, trying to get a reaction from the ovaries. This is why having a high value of FSH is a bad sign. Okay. Then we have the anti-Mullerian hormone. Nowadays, the anti-Mullerian hormone is considered as the best parameter to define the ovarian reserve. Why is that? Because it's the single parameter that better correlates with the probability of pregnancy. So, first of all, we have to understand how it works. Like I was saying, we go from primordial follicles, the ones that women are born with, into the antral follicles. This is what takes about 300 days. And then when the antral follicles are here, those are the ones that we can also detect by an ultrasound scan in the beginning of the cycle. When they are here, they are available to be recruited by the FSH and develop into ovulatory follicles. But when they are available to be recruited, they are producing AMH. So the more follicles we have, the higher the AMH will be. So while it is better to have a low FSH, it is in the case of AMH, the higher the better. Okay, the higher the AMH, the better the prognosis. Obviously, there are specific situations where there could be a problem with an AMH too high, but for low ovarian reserve patients, the higher the AMH, the better. And so we can see that the AMH is very high on average until the age of 35, more or less, and then it starts to go down. Okay, and so this is why pregnancy rates are obviously better above the age, below the age of 35, and tend to decline after the age of 35. Here we have the same scheme that I was talking about. I will not bother you with these details. And so this is the most important take-home message. When we like to establish a normal prognosis, we need to have the FSH below 15, the AMH above 0.5 nanograms per milliliter. It's very important to pay attention to the units, and the antral follicle count above 5. Okay, this is obviously, it will depend on the age of the patient. It will depend on a lot of circumstances of the case, but those are what we call the critical parameters. When we are outside of these values, so when the AMH is lower than 0.5, the FSH is higher than 15, and we have less than 5 antral follicles, the prognosis is bad. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is impossible, but the prognosis is low. Above within these values, we can have hope, and but we always have to discuss it with the patients. But like I was saying, it happens. For example, in this picture, we have a lot of celebrities that are known because they got pregnant very later in life, very late in life. So we don't know exactly what techniques were used because that information is not public, but we can see that Uma Thurman, Salma Hayek, Mariah Carey, Gwen Stefani, Meryl Streep, Kim Basinger, Nicole Kidman, Brooke Shields, Susan Sarandon, Celine Dion, Gina Davis, Halle Berry, they were all known to have children after the age of 40, and some of them well after that age, and almost at 50, or maybe even after 50. So these are cases of women. They are celebrities, but they are women like all others with flesh and bone, and they were able to be mothers. And so we just have to, probably like their doctors did, we have to think of a strategy of what is the best strategy to do to you that are listening to this, the same that these women achieved, being pregnant, probably in a moment where their AMH was already low, where their fertility was already declining. Okay, so this is the problem with low AMH and so on. This is what nature gives us. We always have to bear that in consideration. This is a graphic about natural conception. This is not about IVF. This is about natural conception. And then you can see that the better that we can do as a species, as humans, is to get a 25% pregnancy percentage per month. Okay, so two 25-year-olds, a man and a woman, without any fertility problem, perfectly healthy, in the top of their fertility, they just have a 25% chance. Humans are not a very fertile species. And at the same time, you see that it only declines. So it's relatively steady until the age of 34, 35, and then it starts going down. At the same time, the risk of having a miscarriage increases very steeply. And you can see that at the age of 46, at 46 it goes even above 50%. And this is just nature, okay? It's never zero for any age group, and this is where we can start. So when we are using IVF techniques to take care of the patients, depending on where you are in this curve, we are already fighting nature, because this is what nature gives us. Sometimes we say, well, IVF is not that good because we can only get 50% or 40% or 30% pregnancy. All of those values are above what nature gives us in the first place. So we've achieved a lot. Obviously, we are still far from 100%, and so we have to take in consideration all aspects of the problem. And why does it happen? Because the eggs start the eggs that women are producing with the progression of age, they contain genetic errors. So this means we call it aneuploidy. Aneuploidy is a chromosomical abnormality, a numerical chromosomal abnormality. It means that a certain egg has the wrong number of chromosomes. And so we can see this in the blue line. The higher the age gets, the more likely you are to be producing eggs with the wrong number of chromosomes. And obviously, the probability of having a baby is going down, and the probability of having a miscarriage increases exactly the same way. So, so the problem is essentially a genetic question. Women with the progression of age, not only the number of eggs is lower, like we've seen in the AMH graphic, but also their quality is also lower, like we can see in the number of chromosome or in the quality of chromosomes graphic here on the left-hand side. And then we also have this statistic here where we can correlate the probability of having a trisomy. Trisomy is just one of the most famous aneuploidies, meaning one of the most famous, chromosomical, one of the most known chromosomal numeric abnormalities. And we can see that when we get after the age of 34, the probability of having a trisomy spikes incredibly in a very, very steep way. And here we can counterbalance that with the risks that we are taking as a society. Because in the 70s, the average age for women to have a child was around 26 years old. In 94, it was 28. In 2014, it was already past 30. And so we are sort of climbing this stair. And obviously, the later we get, women start to have babies in life, the more likely they are to be somewhere here. And when we're talking about trisomy, we're also talking about other types of aneuploidies. And so this is the problem of age and the problem of low AMH. So what do we have to do? We cannot make time go backwards. Okay, so we have to work with what we have. Okay, so we have to evaluate every patient individually. All patients are different. Sometimes patients get here because they've heard a recommendation to a friend, to someone who is also doing treatment at the same clinic as them, and they are asking us, why is my friend doing this and I'm doing something else? There's always a reason. Okay, we need to talk about it. We need to discuss with the patients. We need to discuss the risks, because there is also sometimes there are risks involved. We have to make patients take informed decisions. We have to avoid multiple pregnancies, because they are very associated with some of the risks of the pregnancy. And obviously, we have to move on if the procedure is safe for both the mother, future baby, and especially if patients are aware of the odds of success. So, like I was saying, if you have a low AMH and you want to get pregnant, well, we need to start talking, and we need to start talking as soon as possible, because we are fighting the clock. First thing that we have to do is to assess your ovarian reserve. That will answer this question. Is it still possible to do treatment with your own eggs? Should we think about egg donation instead? Should we do preimplantation genetic testing? Is that a solution? Is that a possibility for you? Will it make sense? And what about the implantation? What about your uterus? How is its receptivity, its integrity? Are there any issues? Did you have any past surgeries, multiple interventions, lots of miscarriages? We have to look into the full picture and make and have patients making well-informed decisions. So enough with the theory, and so let's talk about the two success examples that my IVF answers asked us to present. The first case is patient number 1. We will call her Anna. It's obviously a fake name. She is 28 years old. She's a very athletic person. Her BMC is 24. She's married. There's no male factor. She took the contraceptive pill for a lot of years, and then she decided to have a baby. She had a pregnancy 2 years before. She had a miscarriage, and she has regular cycles. In principle, everything was in her favor. And then we did her an ovarian reserve evaluation. And what did we found? She only had 5 antral follicles, which is borderline with the values that we were talking about. Her AMH was 0.5, which is also very borderline, and the FSH was 6. So at her age, we would expect her to have more than 10 antral follicles. Sometimes we get patients with more than 20. Very often, she was 28 years old. Her AMH, we would expect it to be around 2.5 or so. She was at 20% of that. Her FSH was okay, though 6 is not bad, and so we did her an ovarian stimulation in order to do an ICSI. Obviously, because she had a very low ovarian reserve, we didn't get many eggs. We had only 3 eggs. From these 3 eggs, only 1 was mature. So we've talked about that with the patient. We've decided to freeze this egg. We did a second ovarian stimulation on a consecutive cycle. It is already proven that when you stimulate the patients in 2 consecutive cycles, the effectiveness of the ovarian stimulation is better. So it's not like the drugs are accumulating in your body, because they will go away 24 hours later, but the egg maturing process sort of goes forward. And so this is why doing consecutive cycles, it's better than wait 2 or 3 cycles. If it's not possible to do consecutive cycles, we don't do it. If it's possible, it's preferable. So we did her a second ovarian stimulation in the cycle immediately after. We get another 3 eggs. This time they were all mature. We were already stimulating her with the highest dosage that we could give her. We warmed the egg that was frozen. We've micro-injected all 4 eggs. We got 4 embryos. Incredibly, we got 4 blastocysts, which is an amazing result. We did a 1 embryo transfer, and she's pregnant, and the pregnancy is now ongoing, and everything is fine with Anna. So what happened? Why is this a success story? Obviously, because there is a pregnancy. But why have we selected this case to discuss today? Because it's an example on how important age is. You see, if we have a low ovarian reserve, but in a younger patient, the prognosis can still be good. Okay, so obviously these parameters would be terrible. The prognosis was not very good, but the age effect was so important that we ended up having brilliant results with a patient that wasn't that had not such a great prognosis. So then we go to case number 2. This is Jane. Jane is 41 years old. She's a very slim and beautiful lady. Her BMI is 22. She's single, and she contacted us to become a single mother. She wanted to get pregnant with a sperm donor, a non-anonymous sperm donor. She had one pregnancy at the age of 22, but she did an abortion because it was an accident, and then she never got pregnant again. She has regular cycles, and now it was a moment in her life where she decided to become a single mother. However, like we would expect, knowing that she's 41 years old, her antral follicle count was also very low. She had 5. Her AMH was according to the age, 0.7, which is fine. Okay, I mean, it's not fine. It's compatible with age. We would prefer this to be a lot higher, but we can work with this. And FSH was at 8, which is also okay. A little borderline. We don't like it when the FSH is above 8, but it's certainly below 15, which is sort of our cutoff for a bad prognosis case. So what did we do? We did kind of the same thing that we did with Anna. So we start an ovarian stimulation. We get 4 eggs. Again, only one mature. We've frozen that egg. We vitrified that egg. Then we did a second ovarian stimulation. 4 eggs, all mature. We injected all 5 eggs. We got 4 embryos, 2 blastocysts. We did a PGTA, the pre-implantation genetic test. Why is that? Because this patient, normally above the age of 39, we consider that the risk of having an abnormal embryo is very high, and so we always advise that to all patients. And so we got 1 out of the 2 embryos was euploid, meaning that it had a normal genetic constitution. Then since this embryo was so precious, what we did was an endometrial assessment test. We did what we call the ERA test. So we tried to find the window of implantation for this embryo. And so we played with all factors that we could control, because we knew that this only euploid embryo that we have achieved after 2 kind of aggressive ovarian stimulations was very pressure, and so we tried to control as many factors as we could. So we did we transferred the only embryo we had, and it was Jane, her name. I remember. Yes, it's a fake name, obviously. Jane got pregnant. She had a beautiful baby girl already, and so it was a really nice case as well. So what's the alternative that we also need to discuss? What about egg donation? Because we are talking about success stories. This is sort of a message of hope that it could worth trying, but obviously for the majority of patients with low AMH, the prognosis is not that good. And in some situations, there is a possibility of doing an egg donation. It's kind of the last resource. It's also the most reliable one. Why is that? Because it works. Okay, you can see in this graphic from the United States that probability of success with egg donation is around 60% in all age groups, while for women using their own eggs, it starts in 50 and it goes only down as long as the age increases. So egg donation is kind of the last resource. This is to let you know that if we try to do a stimulation and we don't get a pregnancy, this doesn't necessarily mean that you will never become a mother. It will just mean that you will probably need to use another strategy. Of course, this is not something we want in the beginning, but nowadays we have non-anonymous donors. We respect the child's right to know their origins, and we can do these treatments in a very transparent and then limited and well-controlled and properly counseled way, obviously in an affordable and accessible way without waiting lists. And so it is something that we should always inform patients, because sometimes trying to get pregnant with a low AMH can be a very long process. We can sometimes we need to do multiple stimulations with multiple protocols, freeze eggs, start over, freeze another 2 eggs and start over. And so this is not for everyone in financial terms, also in emotional and even in physical terms. So egg donation is kind of the backup plan that's also available, and for some patients it can also be the only solution or the only real solution. This is about the anonymous donors. There is another communication about this, just that it makes no sense to think that the donor can be anonymous, because nowadays all donors are non-anonymous. And so thank you for your attention. I'll be very happy to answer your questions. So Caroline, the word is yours.
Thank you so much indeed. As always, interesting, and you always explain it so interestingly. So thanks so much indeed for bringing those cases as well. And as always, it's time for your questions, Dr. Silva. As you can see, there are plenty of questions for you right here
Okay,
already.
wonderful.
So let's get going. Let's go ahead with those. Okay, so let me have a look at the first one. This is the start from Christina. So, good evening. I'm 41, doing embryo banking. I froze 2 grade 1 embryos when I was 40, and 2 grade 2 embryos are 41. They are day 3 embryos, as my clinic recommends freezing at day 3 when you only have a few embryos. How many embryos I should accumulate to have a real pregnancy chance at my age? I have a low AMH, around 0.3 nanograms. Also, should I transfer 1 or 2 embryos at one time? Thank you.
Okay, so first of all, it is a very personal question and a personal decision, because because there's also a lot of questions here. So starting from the beginning, day 3 or day 5 embryos. Normally, I would prefer day 5 embryos, because it's preferable, especially when I mean, it has to do with the strategy. Normally, what I always tell patients is this: extended culture will not improve the quality of an embryo, but it will give us more information about that embryo. If we're not doing invasive procedures, like, for example, PGTA or pre-implantation genetic testing for aneuploidies, we can at least observe the embryos with video time lapse and understand if they have a normal development. There are multiple algorithms that can help us to understand whether the embryo is a good prognosis one or not. And obviously, the more information we have about that embryo, the better. And so I would say that day 5 is preferable over day 3. Also, but obviously, if you tell me that you want to maximize the odds of every single embryo, the less we manipulate the embryo, the better. And so in that sense, day 3 is also a respectable option. So At our clinic at Ferticentro, we usually go to day 5 because we prefer to be sure that the embryo really is capable of forming a blastocyst. But sometimes, in many cases, in some cases, not many, when patients say, I just want to give my embryo the best possible chance. And the best incubator in the world is the human uterus, is not our embryoscopes or whatever other incubators we might have. So, like I was saying, it's really a personal decision. If you want to maximize the odds, you should transfer them as soon as possible to lower the manipulation in the lab. If you want to be as informed and certain as possible, then definitely day 5. Then the second question is, how many embryos should I accumulate to have a real pregnancy chance at my age? Well, it depends on a lot of factors. We have Christina's AMH of 0.3, which is really low. Okay, so probably in theory we would be talking about 5 to 10% of pregnancy. So in theory it should be around 10 to 15 embryos to, but this is statistics. Okay, so you can flip a coin 5 times, it can fall always in the same side, but you know that if you flip it 1,000 times, it will be more or less 500 times tails and for 500 times crowns. So it's something that depends on luck, because we are working with low numbers of eggs, and so statistics is an indication. But when we are discussing an individual patient's case, statistics is not that important. So we end up in the informed decisions parameter. So if you can make an informed decision on whether how many stimulations you want to be doing, because in the case of Christina, she will never get, I mean, it's very unlikely that we will get 10 or 15 embryos with her. So sometimes we have to, it's also not good for the patient to do multiple ovarian stimulations. It can be very aggressive. So my advice would be to do 3, maybe 4 ovarian stimulations. That's already a lot to protect Christina's health. And then if she wants to be as sure as possible, maybe warm all the embryos, take them all to day 5, do an embryo biopsy in order to do a PGTA, a pre-implantation genetic test, to see if the embryos are viable or not, and just transfer the viable euploid embryos. If she doesn't want to test her embryos in terms of genetics, we can just take them to day 5, see which embryos form blastocysts, and transfer those ones. Or if she doesn't want to do that as well, and she just wants to maximize the odds, the accumulated pregnancy odds, then she should transfer all embryos, 1 or 2 at a time. She's asking 1 or 2 at one time. We always say that as a clinic, our policy, our answer is always the same: just 1 embryo. Why is that? Because over the age of 40, having twins can represent a lot of risks. However, in this particular case, since the AMH is low and the probability of pregnancy is also low, it's not shocking to transfer 2 embryos. And so in order to maximize the odds of getting a pregnancy in that particular embryo transfer, 2 embryos seem like a sensible approach. So if we're working with day 3 embryos, I would probably say 2 embryos. If we're working with blastocysts, maybe just 1. If we were working with PGTA tested blastocysts, definitely just 1.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much indeed. And actually, let me go straight to the next question Christina has. Okay. The grade 2 embryos have 6 cells each and they have some fragmentation. Do they have a lower potential than the grade 1 embryo?
It will depend on the clinic's system of embryo classification. In principle, day 3 embryos should have 8 cells, so in the theory, the potential is not the same, but this is another reason why I would take them to day 5. I would, if the embryos are not perfect, if they have some fragmentation and not the right number of cells, it would be preferable to know a little more about them before to see if we can trust in them or not. Okay, so I would take this case to the blastocyst stage.
All right. Thank you so much for your thorough answer and your advice, of course. Next question as well, a bit of a longer question, and there's a thank you from our patient for you, from Christina, of
Okay,
course.
thank you, Christina.
Okay, let's have a look. Okay, as I mentioned, a little bit more details here as well. Age 32, no previous pregnancy ever, was on pill from age 18 to 25, then next plan on implant BC from 26 to 31. When I took my next plan on out in April 21, I got my period back in June of 21, started fertility lab work in July. AMH is coming in very low at 0.59 nanograms. My FSH has been up and down each month at cycle day 3, as low as 7.2, high as 29. My question is, it's been 6 months since my next planon came out, but could my system still be asleep from BC and AMH could rise with more time? Potential for success with IVF? Any suggestions for improving chances for achieving pregnancy?
Well, I mean, we don't have all the information, but we have a lot of information actually. But so I would say that I really don't think this could be an effect of the next planon, the implant, the subcutaneous implant. So to explain to the other patients, what this patient had was a subcutaneous implant working as a contraceptive. So I really don't think that this is the cause. Okay, sometimes we have that effect in the first couple of cycles, but then 6 months later, things should be back to normal. So I don't think, unfortunately, there is any reliable way to make AMH rise, and so I would definitely advise. This case reminds me of the first success story I told about that patient called Anna, because she was 28. Ashley here, she's 32. And so her AMH is quite low, okay, 0.05 in the same units that I presented. It's a very low value. So, and having an FSH of 29 is also of concern. So my advice for Ashley is do IVF as soon as possible with a very strong ovarian stimulation protocol, and see if her ovaries respond. I wouldn't lose not a single extra month because it's becoming urgent, and like she says, her FSH is going up and down, and this is very characteristic of the transition to menopause. She's not on menopause, but her ovaries are her ovarian reserve is certainly very low, and she's getting there. So even though there are lots of other tests that could be made, namely genetic tests, and we need to understand why is this happening. But bottom line here is she can't lose any more time. So Ashley, if you, our advice here is for you to try to do treatment next cycle if possible, or as soon as you can, because this will not get any better. You're still 32, which is a good prognosis factor, and so but based on this, there is a certain risk that you will be soon on menopause. So don't lose any more time and start IVF if you can.
Of course. Thank you so much indeed as well again for your advice, and Ashley also for sharing. And I hope that that was helpful for you as always.
Yes.
And let's have a look. Okay, next question is up here. Thank you so much for this. A few questions. What is the cost of IVF in Portugal, right? So the Dr.
Yeah.
Vladimiro is in Portugal, but I guess we can answer that. I'm 40 and my first IVF with my own ex failed, even though we got two good looking day 3 embryos. My partner has low sperm motility and 1% sperm morphology, but that's significant why I'm doing ICSI. Correct. Do you recommend I do a second IVF with donor X? At what stage should I consider a surrogate? My AMH is 0.83, FSH is 4.7. Should I also ask for endometrial biopsy?
Well, once again, a lot of
Yep,
questions.
that's
So,
right.
like Caroline was saying, I'm in Portugal, not in Spain, but starting from the beginning, in Portugal, an IVF treatment costs, at least at our clinics, at around 4,000, costs 4,550 euros. Obviously, it could be, we have to add the cost of medication and blood tests to this. So, medication here can only be bought in pharmacies. It will cost you more or less another 800 euros or 1,000 euros, depending on the treatment protocol. Regarding your case, you are 40 years old, so you had two day 3 embryos. Once again, I would think it would be, I mean, good looking day 3 embryos. It's one of those decisions that we always have to balance between optimizing the chances of implantation for those embryos or trying to see if they make it to the blastocyst stage. Initially, the option was to optimize the chances, which is perfectly respectable. We sometimes do it, but in an eventual new attempt, I would definitely take them to the blastocyst stage. Regarding the sperm, actually, male factor can also play a role. Okay, obviously, by doing ICSI, we can overcome a lot of problems. But if the sperm is not genetically normal, it's not the fact that we are doing ICSI that changes it. Okay, so the problem here is that we don't have that many eggs to try, and so in principle. We also don't know the cause of the sperm abnormality parameters. Yes, ICSI can help us to overcome that factor, but that's not insignificant. We all know that IVF, and in this case ICSI, has a lower prognosis when the sperm has lower values. So recommending second IVF with donor eggs or trying again with her eggs. It's a personal decision. Her AMH is 0.83, which is actually not bad. FSH is 4.7, so I would say that it's still possible to try with Shilpi's eggs. So again, we could maybe do a genetic test to the embryos to see if they are really viable. But normally at our clinic at Ferticentro, our policy is not to do. I mean, we only talk about egg donation as a egg donation is not the first line option. Okay, so we only suggest or we only offer egg donation when we think that's impossible or a very low prognosis with the patient's eggs. And normally we like to try at least 3 times with the patient's eggs before resourcing to egg donation. Obviously, with this age, these previous results, and this ovarian reserve, the decision to go directly with egg donation, it's also perfectly respectable and understandable, and we can do it. Okay, it's part of the discussion that we have with the patients. Normally we always ask patients, what's more important to you, to have a family as soon as possible and forget all of these treatments and so on, or do you value the most the fact that you can try to have a baby with your own eggs? So that's it's more about the moment where you are ready to make that step than the moment where uh, because from a medical point of view, it's perfectly possible to try with Shilpi's eggs. But obviously, like I said, it's her life, it's her relationship, it's her money, it's her body. So uh, we can only give her the information, but the decision has to be made by the patient. Regarding the surrogate, well, I don't see any indication for that, so I would say no. Endometrial biopsy. Well, if the embryo is viable, yes. If we don't know nothing about the embryo, I wouldn't do it. Okay, so it's preferable to know if the embryo is viable or not, and then if you have a viable embryo, like the second example I gave, then we can think about optimizing the endometrium. So for the moment, no to the endometrial biopsy, and yes to trying again with her own eggs. And good luck, Shilpi.
Of course. Excellent. Thank you so much indeed once
Mhm.
again. And Ashley has another question, okay? The previous patient. So, are there any supplements which we can use to assist? I now understand that we are fighting against nature, but maybe if you can
Well,
add anything.
Amaka, unfortunately, there are no miracles here. Um, if we go and see what's in the market, there are lots of supplements, but I mean, there is some scientific evidence, not very strong, that in some situations, some supplements can help. So I would say that it is more important for younger patients trying to conceive naturally without the help of IVF and so on. From the moment that you have a low ovarian reserve and you really need to do IVF, um, I would say that the effect of the supplements is limited, but at the same time, you can try because they won't do no harm. They might or might not do some good. So typically, what we say is you can try. We leave that decision to the patients. We don't oppose it. We like to know what the patients are taking because sometimes there are certain things that can be taken that we don't advise. But so I would say they won't do no harm, but I really don't know if they would do any good.
Understood, of course. Thank you so
And good
much.
luck, Anaka.
Of course.
I forgot to wish Ashley good luck as well because
Actually, yes, I was wrong. Of course, there will be questions from
Mm.
Ashley right here.
Okay,
Sorry, my
there
mistake.
she is
I made a
again. Okay.
yes, exactly. So for my AMH level, would you do low met or high steam doses for IVF? I've been listening to Spring Fertility about using lower dose rather than high dose on low AMH cases and having more success.
Um, so that's actually an interesting discussion because um, a few years ago, low dosage, what we call mild IVF for low ovarian reserve patients, was kind of the thing in medical congresses, and a lot of people in the world was doing that. Were doing that. We were also doing that at Ferticentro, and the results are variable. Nowadays, these days at least, the tendency is towards higher dosage stimulations. I think we can try. Okay, so normally, Ashley, just remember this was the lady with 41 years old, right? And an AMH of I don't
I
remember her
can
AMH.
show you just here, just to be sure. 32 AMH
The 32. Ah,
0.56.
okay, okay. So in that case, I wouldn't do a low dosage ovarian stimulation because Ashley is young. Okay, she's 32. In that case, it's preferable to try to get to take the ovaries to the limit and see what we can do. In mild IVF, we will maybe get an egg or no more than that, and theoretically speaking, that egg would have a better quality. But we really don't know whether that's the case or not. So um, at Ferticentro, in cases like this, we always start to try the high stimulation approach. It doesn't necessarily mean that we cannot try the mild stimulation, but the first line approach would be the high stimulation.
All right. Thank you for the clarification.
And good
Then,
luck again, Ashley.
of course. Thank you so much. And let's have a look. Okay, some more questions are coming up. This one is right here as well. In a Guardian article, I read that transferring multiple embryos could result in failure to implant if one of the embryos is abnormal, even though it looks normal, because the body focuses on the bad embryo and rejects both. Do you agree with that?
No. Well, first of all, like I said, I don't know if I was replying to Shilpi or another question. We always advise patients to transfer one embryo at a time. Okay, so but that's because of the risk of multiple pregnancies. The rationale behind this sentence is that sometimes having multiple embryos can trigger a higher immune response from the body, and so you can sort of trigger a cascade of events that will end up in a miscarriage. And obviously, sometimes if the embryo is abnormal, it can cause complication and implants, and that will ultimately harm the other embryo. So there is a truth behind this sentence. However, when we are talking about IVF, so it's, well, first of all, it's preferable to transfer just one, but normally embryos have an individual probability of implantation. They won't harm each other unless, obviously, we are one of those very rare cases with immune disorders, with gear antigen and incompatibility, or, for example, um, if there is an implantation and the vanishing twin, and that kind of factors can obviously cause problems, but those are very rare circumstances. Okay, for the vast majority of patients, a second embryo will not harm the first one. But so this is why I said no in the first place. But again, I would say it's preferable to transfer just one, a good one, to understand whether the embryo is good, forms a nice blastocyst, whether that nice blastocyst has the correct genetical constitution, and then transfer just that one to an optimized endometrium. That's the gold standard of IVF these days. Transferring multiple day 3 embryos and so on, it's, I mean, it's acceptable, but it's not something, but you will always be lost. For example, when you transfer two and you don't get an implantation, you don't know whether it was the embryo or the endometrium, and you are kind of lost. So it's preferable to do things in the best informed way. So, and the best informed way in this case is to know exactly whether the embryos are viable or not.
And again, thank you so much indeed for explaining, of course, and that question indeed as well. And let's have a look. We have a question in regards to the case you have presented. So, why did you do no ICSI with the one mature oocyte in case one, but freeze it without ICSI?
It was just a question of optimizing the procedure, because well, in Portugal, there are two reasons. One is a legal reason, and the other one is kind of a technical reason. So, in Portugal, the law states that we can only create new embryos once the previous embryos have been transferred, unless there is a medical justification for that. The clinical director of the can justify situations where we can accumulate embryos. Normally, we only do that in PGTA cases. So the other reason was to optimize the process, also from an economic point of view, because it costs the same to fertilize one embryo or 20 embryos or 30 embryos. It's just one ICSI procedure. And so if we could save the patient some money, we do it. Obviously, in order to do this, we have to have a very good egg vitrification system in place. We have to trust a lot in our lab. And so, but egg vitrification nowadays has more or less 90% of survival, which is great, and so it allows us to do this kind of techniques, and sorry, and also to maximize. I mean, it's more cost effective for the patient. Obviously, if we fertilize an embryo at a time, we're doing more procedures, but it's less manipulation for the initial egg. So it also has its advantages. It's something that we can do in some cases, but most of the times we freeze eggs.
All right. Thank you so much, Sebastian, for that question, and of course for your answer to that. as well. And there are like 2 questions and we'll be finishing. So if you have more, go ahead, type those in. This will be like final call for those questions. And now let's have a look. We have a bit of a longer question again. Tara has said here, I am almost 45, trying to conceive for my first, for the last, 14 months. My AMH 0.5 and FSH 7. I have a normal cycle. My partner is 44, sperm is normal. I have attended a gynecologist and he did a brief ultrasound and found everything is normal. Cannot see why I should not become pregnant eventually, as he thinks menopause is a long way away yet for me. He advised against IVF because he thought it would be a waste of money and time given my AMH unless we will use donor eggs, which we are not interested in. What do you think?
Well, I would say that Tara should start IVF as soon as possible, because at the age of 45, her gynecologist is right while advising her to use donor eggs. Okay, the indication is clear. Because at the age of 45, the odds of having a pregnancy with her own eggs are below 5%, and we can't really establish a percentage. However, her AMH and FSH are still compatible with an ovarian stimulation. So we have lots of cases, not thousands, but we have many cases where at this stage and based on these values, we achieved pregnancies through IVF. So it is true that the chances are low, but they are certainly a lot higher than trying just naturally or via intrauterine insemination. Okay, so if for Tara, donor eggs is not an option, it is probably either IVF or not having kids. Okay, because it's unfortunately there's not much that we can do. When we are doing IVF, we are turning the process a lot more effective. We are controlling the amount of hormones that are there while the egg is developing. We are controlling the rate of the development of the egg. We are inducing the egg to mature in the right way with the right amount of hormones. We are collecting the egg directly. We are making sure that one selected spermatozoa will enter the egg in the perfect moment. We are developing the embryo in the lab, and we are placing the embryo in the right place at the right time. So we are doing a lot of procedures that will turn the process more effective. Obviously, if the egg is not good or the sperm is not good, there's nothing we can do about it because IVF clinics can't make eggs or embryos. But by doing this artificially, we are becoming a lot more effective than what happens in nature. Okay, so my advice would also be egg donation, clearly. But if egg donation is not an option, I would advise Tara to try IVF as soon as possible, because she's now running against the clock, and every cycle, every additional cycle she loses, it's one less of a chance for her to have a baby. And sometimes this could make a difference.
Of course, thank you
Good luck,
so
Tara.
much. Of course,
Okay.
as always, fingers crossed to everyone for sure. Let's have a look. Okay, more questions are coming up, so let me go to this one. Carla has added, I'm 40, my AMH is 0.24, FSH is 8. I have made one IVF with hormones and only one egg with no success. Then I made a natural cycle with letrozole. I had 2 eggs, but only one for IVF and with no success. With this AMH and FSH, should I go to donor eggs?
Well, Carla, in my opinion, I don't know. Well, I would say that the first option, we would need a little more details, but the answer would be yes. Okay, it's definitely an indication for donor eggs. I can't say that it is impossible with your own eggs, because you have you're still having eggs even with just letrozole. Letrozole is used in mild stimulation protocols, so I think we can try either with a more aggressive approach and see if the ovaries respond. But if you want to move on, there's absolutely no comparison between the probability of getting pregnant with donor eggs, which is between 60 and maybe 70%, and the probability of having a baby with your own eggs at the age of 40 and with such a low AMH. Okay, it's not impossible. It's a personal decision. Once again, you can try it because there is your ovaries are still working, not very much, but there is something that can be still something that can be done. However, chances are low. Okay, and so from a medical indication point of view, the indication is clearly egg donation. And good luck, Carla.
Of course. Thank you indeed again for that. And let's have a look. Okay. Another question is here. I'm 40. I had 4 failed IVF with total of 11 embryos transferred in the last 6 years. There is no explanation why implantation didn't happen. Donor eggs are not an option. What would you suggest? And sorry, there's one more information. I have AMH of 0.93.
Okay, Zelika. What I would say is this. Again, we don't know the quality of these embryos. This is why it becomes important to test the embryos in genetic terms. Because sometimes, well, tomorrow I will be doing a presentation about genetic tests and can talk about it. But for example, sometimes I remember a case of a patient who came to our clinic and had, after having 8 embryo transfers in another clinic. Okay, she was always transferring. Well, there were day 3 and day 5. It was a mix of those days, but she had 8 negative embryo transfers. And then we did her, she was 40 or 41, and we did her another ovarian stimulation. We did her an ICSI and then a PGTA cycle to test the embryos. We had another 4 blastocysts, and all of them were carrying abnormalities, genetic abnormalities. And so when we get to that point, we told the patient, well, it is what it is. Your body is probably not producing viable eggs, and so and now she already has 2 kids from egg donation. Okay, and so sometimes it's obviously respectable and and in the case of Celica, so like I was saying, it's a personal option, and we have to respect the patients when they don't want to have donor eggs. Okay, it's completely acceptable. However, in the case of Celica, I would say that it would be important for her to understand whether these embryos are viable or not, because if we do a PGTA and these embryos are viable, maybe the embryos that she transferred before were also viable. And the problem is, for example, in the endometrium. And there are additional tests that we can do, and we can try to find a cause. It's my second example. We wouldn't be transferring the last viable embryo, probably of that patient's life, without being in control of as many factors as possible. So I would say that for Zelica, first of all, let's see if your embryos are viable. If they are viable, let's focus on trying to optimize the endometrium. If the embryos are not viable, the only solution is either to try again or to use donor eggs.
Thank you for yet another advice. And of course, there's a thanks from the patient for you here. And now it looks like this will be our final question, short one this time. A lot of clinics do not treat clients over 42. Does your clinic in Portugal treat women at 45?
Of course, we accept patients until the age of 49. Obviously, at 49, we can only do donor eggs. So while trying, we focus more on the patient's conditions and ovarian reserve and the parameters than on the age. Okay, we have people getting pregnant with her own eggs at the age of 46, but But obviously that doesn't happen every day. So we take a look at the situation, we discuss it with the patient, we make sure that the patient makes an informed decision. And so as long as patients are aware of the odds and it is medically possible, we give it a try. Okay, we don't give up on patients just because of their age alone. But obviously, we have to be sure that patients are really aware of the odds.
All right, brilliant. Thank you so much. As I mentioned, that was our final question. So thank you everyone for your questions. And well, I definitely think it was useful. And Dr. Silva, as always, it's great to have you here. You are always thorough with your answers. And I love that for sure. And of course, as you can see, there are things coming up your way for an informative webinar. And there are thank yous also for answering all the questions. So
Okay.
thanks
Thank
a
you,
lot.
Caroline. Thank you, everybody, for listening to me. I'm sorry for not being Dr. Paula here, but I think
Next time, hopefully, Dr. Pala will be able to present. So of course, I'm definitely looking forward to this. But I'm glad that you were able to be here instead of her, and we didn't need to cancel. And I believe that everyone agrees with me because it was definitely interesting. And yeah, as you can see, more comments are coming up. So
so sweet.
thanks a lot, of course. And well, as you know, Dr. Silva will be back tomorrow. We have another
Yeah.
webinar with him at 7 p.m. UK time. It will be about PGTA, so genetics. So, of course, you can sign up and join us tomorrow. And of course, if you have questions, you know that Dr. Silva will be happy to help you out with those as well. Before we finish, anything else you would like to add?
No, it's fine. So maybe see you tomorrow then. And
Exactly, right?
for having me and us. Okay. And good
Perfect.
luck to everyone who is trying for a baby, and fingers crossed for you.
As always, we are keeping fingers crossed for all of you. And as I mentioned, I do hope that you will be able to join us tomorrow and we'll be able to get some more answers. Just let me remind everyone this has been recorded, so you will be able to watch this, of course, again. And Dr. Silva will be tomorrow, but will be here tomorrow, but also he will be here on Thursday. We have 3 webinars this week, so I'm really excited
Yeah.
to have you as our speaker. So have a lovely evening and good night to everybody. And of course, see you
Okay. See
see you
you tomorrow
tomorrow. Okay,
then. Bye bye.
see you. Bye.